Hey, what's going on? Um, Today I'm going to be reading The Abused and the Broken by Cardenas. Introduction. There is no such thing as an innocent person. Innocence is lost as a child and grows, and once tainted is lost forever. There is no such thing as good and evil. There is no black and white to this world, for we are all a mixture of both good and evil, light and dark. We are all different shades of gray, never pure white or completely black, but forever hovering somewhat in between. We are all tainted from the inevitable moment when our innocence dies. Chapter 1. Daniel and Luther. Daniel. Daniel hit the ground hard, spitting blood from his mouth. He scrambled quickly to his feet before the boy towering above him could pin him, and felt a spike of fear as he realized he was cornered. He backed up against the school's tall red brick walls, staring past the approaching boys to the only way out. The five were laughing, taking pleasure in the momentary fear that had clearly shown on his face. He hurried to bury it, wiping his face clean of expression and preparing himself to fight. He knew the battle was already lost, but there was no way in hell he was going to lie down and make it easier for them. You should really learn to stay out of my way, Talon, the tall blonde center of the group sneered, green eyes lit with amusement. Daniel straightened up, staring defiantly back at him. You're the one who shoved into me, Hackle, he shouted, forcing his voice to sound strong. The blond boy's eyes glinted dangerously at his sneer spread. Too bad that it doesn't really make a difference, huh, Talon? And with that, Hackle motioned to the boy to his left, and the large, brown-haired boy ran straight for him. Daniel managed to dive out of the way, but was pinned by other large, bear-like boy to Hackle's right. The two boys pinned him against the wall, and another ran at him, with a wide grin, thrusting his clenched fist into Daniel's stomach. He felt the body buck at the blow, but he kept his mouth firmly shut. He refused to give him the satisfaction of hearing him cry out. The blond boy approached and grabbed Daniel's face hard, forcing his pained brown eyes to look into his own glittering green ones with the cruel amusement. Poor Talon, always the weakest little freak at this school. Hackle spoke the words softly, his smile dancing in his eyes. Daniel stared at him and then kicked him straight in the stomach. He knew the moment he did it that it was a near suicidal move. The two boys had pinned him, and he was completely at their mercy. Hackle bucked backwards, dropping Daniel's face and sucking in a sharp breath before looking back up with cold, dark eyes, all traces of humor gone. "Get him!" Hackle commanded, and Daniel felt searing pain as numerous feet and fists beat him into the ground. He blacked out eventually, and when he came to, he could see blurry images of five retreating forms and heard high, raucous laughter ringing in his ears. He lay there a long time, trying to breathe properly and control the nausea the pain had brought. He needed to keep his food down. He knew he wouldn't have a chance to eat again until the next day at school. He hoisted himself up the wall gingerly and began to slowly walk away from the building. He saw his backpack in the grass where he dropped it and when running from Hackle and his gang, and stooped to pick it up. He winced when he slung it over his back, and the bag hit a particularly painful bruise on the back of his shoulder. He walked in silence, making his way towards the current foster house. He thought of Hackle as he walked, seething with every pain that shot across his damaged body. Luther Hackle had made it his life's mission to torment Daniel ever since kindergarten, and here they were, 11 years later, and nothing had changed. They had traveled through elementary, junior high, and now they were in their junior year of high school together. Luther had never ceased in the constant bullying over Daniel's baggy, ragged clothes, small, thin appearance, and, of course, the fact that he was completely friendless and alone. The Daniel was used to being alone. He had bounced from foster house to foster house for years now. He'd never had a friend in his life. His mother died giving birth to him, and she had been alone with no living relatives. She couldn't tell him who the father was because she didn't know. She had been raped, and they never found the criminal. The only thing Daniel really knew was that the mother's name was Sarah Talon. Daniel tried to push that dark thought from his mind, not wanting to think about the horrible way he had come to be. It always made his stomach sick. When he reached the front door of the house, he braced himself, hoping against the hope that he could sneak by without drawing attention to himself. The woman was sitting in the velvet recliner, head thrown back and snoring loudly. The television was on, but other than that, the house was silent. The man wasn't home yet. Daniel let out a quiet sigh of relief and tiptoed to the small bathroom. He looked at his appearance in the mirror, and his untamed black hair, unhealthy pale skin, and the sickening way his bones stood out. Then he looked at the marks that covered large sections of that pale skin, cursing Luther Hackle as he stripped and turned the shower on. His lip was busted, and his eye was black. Those would be hard to hide. The bruises on his arms and torso weren't so bad. They'd be easy enough to cover anyways. He stepped into the water and watched as some of his blood went down the drain. He rubbed the blood and dirt from his skin, trying to ignore the way water made his injury sting. Daniel was used to injuries. Between being an awkward, scrawny teenage foster kid and being bullied at school, injuries were unavoidable. As he left the shower, he wrapped himself tightly in a towel and peeked out again. The house was still quiet, besides the television and snores. He walked quietly to the room as he'd been staying in and sat on his bare, torn mattress where it lay on the ground in the corner of the room. He pulled a suitcase towards him, rummaging for more clothes. Once dressed, he laid back on the mattress, pulling his flattened pillow and holey blanket towards him. He needed to come up with a way to hide his damaged face. The last time the man here had seen his injuries, he told him that he would force him to learn to fight like a man, and then proceeded to beat him into a much worse state than he had been in previously. This too was a normal thing for Daniel. There was no room in the local orphanage, and all the good foster families wanted cute little ones. He was a reject teenager, and therefore he got stuck in the only places they could find for him. Those places were typically much like this one, but it wasn't too bad, as long as he kept out of the way and was seen as little as possible. Sighing, he rolled over on his side. All he wanted to do was sleep, but he was terrified of what could happen if the man came home and saw the state of him. Eventually, he placed the pillow over his face rather than under, and hoped for the best as his consciousness faded away. Luther. Luther laughed with his friends and waved lazily behind him as he approached the brand new Mustang in the school parking lot. "See you tomorrow, man," Gavin, the largest of his group, yelled over his shoulder. Luther gave a brief nod as he clicked the button in his keychain and slid into the confines of his black leather seats. He pressed the button to start the car and pulled out of the parking lot with ease. He caught a look at his reflection in the mirror and narrowed his eyes. Usually impeccable hair. Apparently it had become quite tousled in the fight. He was the last of his friends to exit the parking lot, and he slowed as he passed by the front of the school. He watched Daniel stooped to pick up his fallen backpack and winced rather badly when putting it on. Luther pursed his lips. Passing by, he hadn't meant for things to go as far as they had. He enjoyed bullying Daniel. In fact, he was his favorite victim. His reactions were never what Luther expected, and this made him more fun than all the others. Daniel seemed incapable of lying down and taking anything. He always had snappy comebacks and attempted, no matter how futilely, to fight back. For example, Luther never expected that Daniel would kick him in the stomach when he was being held and surrounded by Luther's gang. It had been quite stupid of the boy, and he had to keep face in front of the guys. He hadn't planned to beat Daniel quite so badly, though. He would try to lay off for a bit for the next few days. He pulled the sleek car into the mini car garage and entered his 4-story home. Mabel, the maid, rushed to take his coat and eyed his hair and bloody knuckles. "Mr. Hackle, you have been fighting again. This," she lifted his blood-stained hand, "is unacceptable. To the washroom at once, please." Luther rolled his eyes and flustered and made his way up to the stairs to his room. Once inside, he walked straight to the adjoining bathroom and turned the shower on. The steam from the many shower heads filled the room immediately. He dropped his clothes and climbed in. He lathered soap into his hair and turned his lean, muscled back to the power of the jets. Once his muscles felt less tight, he was thoroughly clean. He stepped out and eyed his appearance in the full-length mirror. Luther was tall, with fair but healthy skin. His blond hair was bored straight and felt just right, even when wet. His body was covered with lean muscles that flexed when he moved, and his green eyes always seemed to glint as he smirked, almost in a snake-like manner. He toweled his hair as he stepped into his bedroom, pulling a pair of designer jeans and a silk t-shirt from his enormous closet. Once dressed, he made his way back downstairs and toward the kitchen. The maid had already laid out his dinner at the table. He sat and ate in silence until she popped back into the kitchen, refilling his water glass. "Where is my father?" Luther asked, not looking at the maid as he spoke. "He is on a business trip, Mr. Hackle, and your mother has gone on another Paris trip." Luther nodded, unsurprised. "And when will they return?" The maid's expression slipped slightly, frowning. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hackle, I have not been told." Luther nodded and continued eating. Mabel excused herself quietly and left the room. Once finished eating, Luther made his way to the music room on the 3rd floor. He chose a guitar from the wall, sat stroking it lightly. Luther had been into music as long as he could remember, and guitar was his favorite. He had taught himself how to play over the years. He knew his father would have probably paid for professional lessons, but how do you ask someone a favor when they're never around? No, Luther didn't need anyone's help, especially not his father's. After a couple hours of stringing random chords together and making notes of what sounded good, Luther retired to his bed. He lay there, staring up at the ceiling and listening to the silence that he was so very used to. After a while, sleep took him, and he relaxed into the California King's mattress, embracing the darkness.